Welcome Lowell to Scouted by Gravy. When I came across Nambu Group, we were looking for startups which are doing some crazy work in uh, alternative protein, and this idea of hearing insect being used as protein and as food source. Uh, to be honest, it's a little unsettling for me to see and eating bugs. But again, it's very interesting. I'll be open to as soon as these kind of things get more popular. Uh, so I'll start with the very first question. And so, how did this idea came up, Lowell, like behind Nambu Group?
Yeah, shucks. I mean, it definitely is a bit weird. It's a bit different and quite new for a lot of people. Although for a lot of people, it's also quite normal and natural. So I think we sort of in a transition process in that way. The idea came through. It actually came through my studies. So I was doing some postgraduate studies. I'm an agricultural economist by trade, and a lot of my work was looking at the use of insects to control invasive plants or invasive pests and weeds in agriculture. And that sort of opened my eyes to the opportunity that this sort of emerging insect economy presented. And I started doing some research, looking at different insect species. I knew that I wanted to go into agribusiness in one form or another, and somehow this started to make sense, and started looking at first insects for human food. Realized that, most of us aren't quite there yet, though, to eat insects on a regular basis as part of our diets, at least in South Africa and sort of much of the global north. And so again, started looking at insects for livestock feed as a really high value protein source, protein and fat source. And then through that looked at, a couple of different species and ended up with the black soldier fly, which made a lot of sense because it solves some of challenges. So I saw the line just lagged a little bit there. It solves a variety of challenges dealing with food waste, the availability of alternative and sustainable protein sources, which creates, new opportunities in economic activity and business development. And so, it really ticked a lot of boxes for me and was something that, given it's a new industry, it was something I knew I could get into relatively quickly and establish a name for ourselves because there wasn't a lot of very formalized sort of industrial competition yet at the time. So, here we are. That was a couple of years ago, and we've sort of hit the ground and been running ever since.
Oh, that sounds very interesting, and especially the start about and the things that you mentioned about, it's easier to deal with food waste this way. And I've heard black soldier flies are among like the most preferred choice when it comes to, insect-based proteins because their protein per kilogram ratio is much better. Again, I'm not very technical. I don't know a lot of technical side of things, but I know it's better than compared to beef. So is that also something that you guys pitch when you are talking about like why insect-based protein is better compared to traditional protein sources?
So in many ways, because we focused on the feed sector at this stage, we don't necessarily look at comparing it to things like beef or chicken or fish, sort of traditional human-grade protein, just because our target market is predominantly to the livestock feed sector. And so instead, we tend to focus more in the comparison between insect protein or black soldier fly protein in this case, compared to things like fish meal and soya meal as protein sources in livestock feed. That said, when we established with the focus initially on producing protein for livestock feed, but the intention underlying that was really to be able to develop this capacity so that we can, when the market matures a bit more and is a bit more prepared or willing to accept insect protein in human diets, then we can start transitioning into that space. And in that regard, it is a much more efficient protein source than your conventional sources like beef, chicken and pork. That's for a number of reasons, including, firstly, it has to do with their feed conversion ratios. So essentially, how many kilograms of feed are required to produce a kilogram of protein? And the black soldier fly are really efficient in that regard, more so than your traditional species. Also, you can produce them in a much denser setting. So your sort of density per square meter or per hectare is much higher than your other sources of protein, such as beef, chicken, pork. You can farm them vertically, you can farm them indoors, and what's really valuable is you can farm them off waste streams that otherwise would end up exiting the food system in a form of, whether it's going to composting, landfill, whatever the case might be, and instead recycling those nutrients back into the food system as a protein source. So that's really on the food side. On the feed side, it's just a much more environmentally sustainable option. again, because of the circularity of using waste to produce this protein, than if we were to use fish meal, which is a heavily overexploited resource as a protein stock for livestock feed, as well as even soya meal, which is, there's limits to the terrestrial production, so on land production. A lot of that happens in areas that were once rainforests or native grasslands and marsh type areas. So there's a lot of environmental destruction associated with the soya protein industry, as well as with the fish meal. And so, black soldier fly provides a really valuable alternative to that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And of course, in recent years, I've heard a lot about how beef industry is destroying the environment, not just in one way by acquiring like more land, it requires much more space. And then of course, the return on investment in terms of protein is much less on beef compared to like any other kind of meat that humans consume. So okay, so when I got to know about Nambu Group and I was doing some research about it, so I found that you guys are not actually selling products. I mean, you might be selling products based on insect-based protein, but you're also enabling other farmers or livestock owners to so that they can also grow black soldier fly larvae on their land, right on their work grounds. So, is there I mean, did you guys plan this way? Is it a part of your growth strategy? Because I've seen a lot of other insect-based protein makers as well, but they're not directly selling the setup. They're not helping other people also grow the same thing. They're actually selling the products made out of insect proteins, like maybe powders and mulch and animal feed, like byproduct of these larvae. So, but you're doing it one level above and just trying to basically help people that they can also set it up on their land in their work warehouses. So, just wanted to know your views about it.
Sure. So, firstly, we do sell all the insect-based products as well. So we sell the protein, we sell the fertilizer as the byproduct. So those are effectively the main product lines that we run with. We've got some further value-added products as well, but so we do all of that. The training, though, is something that we pretty much since our inception have realized that, for example, in our context in South Africa and Southern Africa, there really is a shortage of knowledge or access to knowledge in terms of the production of insects and this emerging insect economy. So when I wanted to learn about producing BSF, I had to take myself overseas. I took myself to Indonesia to spend about 6 weeks in a facility over there learning how to do it, and then came back to South Africa and started adapting it for our context for those sort of broader Africa. So yeah, we started getting a lot of requests for people who are wanting, a lot of requests for people who are wanting to learn how to do it. And it made a lot of sense to us that if we're able to package what we do into a training and sort of systems provision package, it would, number one, enable us to expand our own business reach and open up a new service line effectively we wouldn't have available earlier or previously. But it would also enable the development of the industry at a broader level in Southern Africa as a whole, which for us as a company is actually quite valuable. There's the concept of, a rising tide floats all ships. The more people, and we've seen this sort of evidence in our work, the more people that are aware about the industry, the more opportunity there's for all of us. The easier my job is in terms of marketing the product, in terms of accessing new market. And what we've also seen, there's a really strong strategic value that we've always focused on with our training, is that a lot of the people that we end up training or assisting end up becoming either clients or partners of ours in one way or form or another. So they either end up buying equipment for us, taking on consulting services, or they potentially end up getting set up as suppliers, so outgrowers, and feeding back into our network, which allows us to be able to expand our product offering or product volume offering without necessarily having to invest in additional production capacity ourselves. So there's been a strategic move there. This sort of underpins a franchise or outgrower model that we have. And at the end of the day, it's also enabled us to learn about a lot of geographies in South Africa and Southern Africa and sort of the regions, opportunities that these different areas pose or present for the industry just through the people we interact with when we do our trainings. So there's some sort of deeper level where we just feel it's important to be able to support the industry's growth, and that'll be good for us long term and the industry as a whole. But at the same time, there is also a strategic value in being able to broaden our network of potential customers, clients, suppliers who are working in our system with quality standards that we are comfortable with. which is really valuable for us long term in terms of our own, as I said, product.
Lowell, that's a great thought, and I totally agree. Actually, enabling your customers to use your technology and your innovation is kind of a formula I've seen in a lot of successful startups in that I have interviewed so far. In Scouted by
Yeah,
Krabi, we recently talked to agriculture robotic startups, and their CEO also had a similar mentality of enabling their customers with the technology. So they were not really just selling the products, but they were like really coaching them how to use it and basically helping their customers to expand the technology further and basically improve on it so that the whole industry grow itself. Which I totally agree, because insect-based protein as an industry, just it's very new and
very new.
it has a very
Yeah,
big need to fulfill. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
and this challenge.
I was going to say, yeah,
Sorry.
there's a lot of, we at such an early stage of the industry that the scope for growth is incredible. And even if we were to grow ourselves 100 times, we would still be a drop in the ocean in terms of what the market demand is from a feed perspective. So, at the end of the day, actually more value than potential harm for us.
Right. Okay, Lowell. So speaking about growth, what kind of challenges Nambu Group has faced so far in growing your business in Africa, or maybe trying to reach globally? Is there any kind of challenge you guys have faced? It could be on a technology level as well. It could be on business side of things as well. Maybe you can share about those. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I think that given the fact that it's such an early stage industry, there has been a lot of learning we've had to do along the way in terms of our production systems, how to do it, how to refine it, how to systematize, and how to package what we do in a way that we can replicate. So we currently run, for example, 3 sites in South Africa, and we've got another 2 sites that are being planned for later this year and early next year. And, at each replication point, there's been a lot of learning that we've had to do about how to sort of, again, as I said, package what we're doing in these different contexts, different geographies with different environmental conditions, different waste or feedstocks, different client profiles, customer profiles, different challenges in terms of waste management infrastructure, other forms of infrastructure. So, there's been a lot of work we've had to do really in a lot of it's been learning by doing. There's been limited opportunity for learning from others just based on the nature of the industry at this stage. Many people in the industry have been sort of not really willing to share experience and knowledge. That is changing. We're seeing that changing. But because of that, in the initial stages, we've had to do a lot of that development work ourselves. And obviously that can be costly. It doesn't only take time, it takes resources to be able to pay for that time in one form or another. But at the end of the day, it has also left us in a position where we've built this really broad competency and deep competency in a range of different aspects in our sector. And that has given us a level of confidence in being able to replicate it and do so quite rapidly. And so at the end of the day, that those challenges have actually worked out in our favor, as much as at the time you can't really see it. My beard's a bit short at the moment, but the number of gray hairs in my beard, I think, is a reflection of all of that. I think beyond that, given the early stage of the market as well, there's been quite a lot of customer or market development that's needed to be done, particularly from a customer education perspective. So customers understanding what the product is, how to use it, the application rates, whether it's on the protein side or the fertilizer, which I mentioned earlier as a byproduct. That obviously takes some time, although again, it's been necessary. And then lastly, also, I just think, the startup environment in South Africa and the broader African context is a lot different to what we see sort of in Europe, North American context from an access to capital perspective. And so, we've had to do a lot of work on really tight budgets. I think, just from what we've seen and experienced, there's a lot easier access to capital in sort of the global north. And that has just been a reality that we've had to address, and it's influenced how we develop. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, that's actually had quite a good impact on our sort of lean approach and the type of technology we use, the costing of our production systems and their appropriateness for our context. So yeah, I'd say those are sort of the majority of the items. We have also, we do serve some international clients. There are always, the requirements that can be a bit of a challenge at first to sort of navigate for export and import into whatever your destination country is. But that's really, again, just been a natural part of our business learning and capacity development in terms of being able to do that and knowing, where to go, what to do, who to speak to effectively to be able to get products into the international market.
Okay. Okay. So Lowell, if I got everything right, so basically your current ongoing challenge is related to logistical things, but overall the challenge that Nambu Group has faced is related to the accessible knowledge available in the market and the accessible capital that is available in Africa, which is a little hard to come by, and some level of technological challenges that you might have already solved. So that is something also that I'd like to dive a little deeper into it. Like, what kind of technological challenges did you face when setting up or when you started building insect-based protein startups? So what kind of innovation challenges have your company solved so far?
So look, I mean, I think the biggest challenge we faced in the beginning is that there just simply wasn't any technology available for the industry. That this is a really good idea that a whole bunch of people, cottoned on to or realized that there was an opportunity with, but there was no underlying production system, or there were no underlying production systems available, readily available on the market. So to give an example, if you wanted to start chicken farming, you can go, on the market, there's a variety of different sort of ready-to-use production systems that you can purchase, deploy, and start producing with really easily. Everything from the specific feeds and the feeding regimens through to the medication, through to actually the housing, etc. For us in our industry, obviously, that hasn't been the case. So we've had to pretty much develop none of that from the ground up. There've been a little bit of guides and sort of, some technology that we've been able to borrow, but a lot of it's had to be, effectively developed from scratch. So that has been just a big challenge because there's been a lot of cost involved just in terms of, trial and error. Okay, we think this can work. Let's try it. Okay, it sort of worked. We have to adapt it. Let's try something else. So some of the areas where we've really focused on include, for example, drying techniques or technologies dogs in one of the dogs in the office. I'm working from home today, so we've had we've had to develop sort of biomass-driven drying techniques for our industry or for our product, and just understanding how the product works and sort of based on that, different approaches we need to use for drying. We've had to do the same thing with our feed mixing. So what is our feed is a very different, unique type of feed. Quality compared to traditional animal feed, and so that's required sort of adaptations to certain machinery. Harvesting as well, so sort of the type of machinery we use for harvesting, it's borrowed from the mining and pharmaceutical industry, but some adaptations that have been needed there. And then just looking at our post-processing as well, so looking at, okay, well, what do our products get used in, and how is the best way for us to be able to process our products for our customers to be able to easily use them. And so, for example, with our fertilizer, that needs to go into a pelletized form for farmers to be able to spread in fertilizer spreaders. A lot of work has had to go into understanding how best to pelletize our product. Same thing with our protein, looking at some liquid products and dried products and powdered products. Relatively standard in some ways, but again, just given the nature of the inputs, we've had to sort of do quite a lot of work around that. And then also in our breeding system. So, this is... our entire process is supported by strong breeding colonies where we're able to reproduce the insects. And again, no existing systems existed. So we've really had to go back to looking at, okay, well, what do they naturally require? What does our environment naturally offer in that regard? And then how do we match those two things at least cost, both from a CapEx perspective, but then also an OpEx perspective, so the ongoing operations. And through that developed a pretty robust, low cost reproduction system, as well as then the post processing from there. So, I mean, that's just at a high level. Obviously, I could speak about some specific things, but I think that sort of covers the majority of the challenges we've sort of faced and had to overcome, or solve for, I should say, in that way.
Man, that sounds like lots of different aspects at different stages that you've solved. Now that you mentioned that breeding also has been a challenge, and you have to, like, of course, makes sense. Insects, they require very specific environment, temperatures, and humidity. Even very minute things can affect their breeding patterns. So, can you shed a little bit more light on how you guys have solved that? Because I feel like that is the base of your supply chain, right? Because if you have more insects, that's how you're going to produce more feed as well. So that would have been one of the most important aspects to solve. What kind of challenges have you faced?
So yeah, I mean, I think on that, look, there's the biggest thing we've really looked at is what does our natural environment offer already? So in the area where our main breeding facility is, we have generally fairly good temperatures and generally good relative humidities. Those are the two biggest impact or factors that impact the breeding success. Beyond that, there are aspects such as light intensity. There's some influence from the environmental conditions or the attractants that you use, so the sort of material or the material or matter that you use to attract the flies to lay their eggs in the place you want them to lay. And then also just looking at the scheduling of their life cycles. So, we've really looked though to say, okay, well, this is what our environment offers. Based on that, we could either go for a totally automated approach, or when I say automated, I'm referring more to an indoor, fully controlled environmental approach. So where we fully control, everything sits inside and we provide all the lighting, all the heating, all the moisture, or the humidity, for example, and control all the other factors. And while that gives you a good reliability in many ways, it's got a very high operational cost to run that sort of system, particularly when, if you've got electricity supply challenges and you end up running on backup generators, those sorts of aspects as well. It also means that your larvae that you're producing or the insects that you're reproducing are quite, because of their epigenetic adaptation, they appear to start becoming more suited to producing or reproducing in certain environments that are very controlled. Whereas our business approach is to run a number of different waste treatment sites with a range of different environmental conditions that they face based on those different sites. And so we need to have a strain of insects that we are reproducing that is quite resilient and able to perform in a range of different environments. And so we've opted for a much more open production system where they are effectively, we expose them to environmental stress. Some changes in temperature, some changes in light intensity, some changes in humidity. And that has resulted over time in a strain that we find to be much more resilient, able to perform well under a variety of conditions. They're not sort of selected because of their very short life cycles. They haven't been genetically selected to produce in these really tightly controlled environments. Instead, they've got a much broader range, capacity to produce in a range of environments. But again, that's had a really significant impact on our production costs and our operation costs. So our reproduction costs and operation costs from there, as well as things like our feed conversion ratios and, based on the actual final quantities of product and quality of product we get out. So we've really sort of taken a slightly different approach to what a lot of the more centralized type models have used.
Thanks for sharing such a detailed overview of how this is happening. So basically, you are not approaching things from like totally closed environment where everything is under control, but you've kept it a little bit more open, letting insects do their thing in their natural environment, and then you just provide them a place to breeding. This I'm imagining this also. This should also affect your sustainability score as well, because this was the whole problem with the beef industry and chicken industry, that they cost a lot to operate and to provide that environment, which in your case it is minimal. It's being kept minimal, even if you basically, because you are also not using the fully closed facility to breed.
Absolutely. I mean, from if you consider it from a carbon intensity perspective, doing it in a fully closed environment is much more carbon intensive because you need to have electricity availability. In South Africa, most electricity comes from coal generation. So, there's as much electricity you use, it's having an impact. Some you might not see it, but it's sort of having an impact on from an emissions perspective. And, we've taken this much less energy intensive perspective. Just looking at our context, thinking about the broader environmental context and considering it from an environmental sustainability perspective, to be able to have as least impact or as little impact as possible.
Okay. So, Lowell, so seeing all this, how you have basically they require a very special environment to breed, and you face challenges in basically how you pack and package the product as well. And I see that I'm reflecting back on our previous question about how your Nambu Group is also enabling your customers to do it on their property in their warehouses. So how complex it is to do something like this, to build a breeding scenario at, let's say if I want to, and I own a livestock company which maybe hosts a lot of chicken, and I want to build this facility on my ground. So how complex it is going to be for me to use Nambu Groups, basically the whole breeding kit, and do it on my own place.
Sure, yourself. So look, I mean, I think that's the answer to that question is going to be dependent on how big you want to go, and what your need is. So, if you're looking at operating at a smaller scale, you've just got, I don't know, 100 chickens maybe, for example, then your feed requirement's going to be much lower. And because of that, your production system is a lot more resilient and can be a lot less complicated. And because of that, it's much easier to set up and to run, and much cheaper to do so as well. If you're wanting to produce for 100,000 chickens, you need a much larger facility that's going to be much more robust and consistent in its output. So because of that, the level of complexity is going to increase, and the associated cost as well. That said, there is also, there's two different ways to approach it. The one hand is that you do the breeding yourself, which is the most technically demanding component of the whole process. And then that means you would be required to develop that technical competency to be able to breed successfully and consistently. However, if you're looking at producing at a very large scale, some players are increasingly looking at just a waste treatment or larvae grow-out model. So instead of doing the breeding and the waste treatment, so feeding the waste to the larvae and growing them out, as well as the reproduction, they would focus just on the waste treatment side, so the waste processing side, and instead buy in the neonates, so the day-old larvae or their baby larvae. And that becomes technically much less complex, even at a large scale as well. But again, the level of complexity really does come down to the size that you're wanting to operate, and then your sort of ends of tolerance for flexibility in your output. So if you are at a smaller scale, generally you have a little bit more tolerance for flexibility in your output. At a larger scale, you generally have less tolerance for flexibility in your output. And so that influences then I would say, technical difficulty of the system. At the end of the day, though, the systems that we've produced or developed and offer into the market are relatively easy to replicate. So, I don't want to make it seem like it's too difficult by speaking about how more technically complex or not. There's always a degree of technical complexity, but at the end of the day, our systems are, from what we've seen in the market, some of the most basic or easy to implement and use, especially in our context.
So Lowell, basically why I wanted to ask the implementation complexity question is how easy it is for a commercial scale business to integrate Nambu Group's technology on their own warehouses. Imagine a company like Nestle or a company of that scale. How easy it is going to be for them to implement something to basically use Nambu Group's technology in their own operation?
Look, I mean, I suppose same answer as before. It depends on the scale, but I think to look at somebody like a large player like Nestle, for example, their production volumes, so their waste treatment volumes, are going to be generally, I would expect, quite high, and because of that, the level of tolerance for a lot of variation in the system is going to be probably quite low. And so, while it's not going to be particularly difficult to implement a system, for example, on site to co-locate a waste treatment process alongside a agro processing facility, for example, is not particularly complex. It is, just given the scale, it's going to take some time to fully develop, implement, and then bring up to full scale. And there'll be a lot of training that's necessary, because at the end of the day, we are still farming. So, a lot of it is, there are technical specifications and, the parameters of what is required and what the insects like and don't like. But at the end of the day, also, there is a degree of intuition or feeling that actually a person needs to develop, like with farming any livestock, where you're able to actually see if there are any problems emerging before they're emerging, just through things like behavior, responses to any environmental stimulus. And that is now more sort of skills development type of requirement as opposed to systems development. So, I think from the systems development perspective, it's actually very easy. As long as we've got the space required and the capital to be able to purchase the equipment and put that in, into the process or to set the process up in that way, that's actually really quite straightforward. The day-to-day management of it from a technical perspective is where a little bit more assistance maybe is required, and that takes a bit more time, so that your operators know what they're doing, they're very confident, and that they're able to respond with within set parameters or with set responses to any variations that happen. Just because what you see happening in a facility from day to day does vary a little bit. It's not like you're just, I'm trying to think, you're not just processing, producing tires. And I'm trying to think of like a really random example, but that's a fairly standardized production system. Once the process is running, and you've learned your job, there's not going to, I would expect at least, I don't mean to knock on the tire industry in any way, I would expect there to be little variation day to day in terms of what the operation might have to deal with or operator might have to deal with. Whereas in farming, that's never exactly the case. There's always going to be quite a bit of variation that you just need to be able to understand and then adapt to, again, with set responses. So our system is quite robust in that way, in that if you see X, do Y. If you see A, do B, sort of thing. And if you're really uncertain, then there's always technical support available. But that's sort of where I'd say would be more, a little bit more demanding in a way.
Okay, makes sense. I think then it makes sense for a larger company to, instead of setting things up on their end, because of course it requires a lot of continuous effort. I won't say effort, but it requires continuous look after on some sort
monitoring
of
and
some level.
evaluation. Yeah. Which is
Yes,
also,
yes. So
that's something that increasingly we offer, is to say, look, some people want to do it by themselves, some people don't. Some people want to work with somebody or to contract somebody who can do it for them, who comes in with the expertise and the knowledge and like contracts to do all that work, which is something that increasingly we're offering as well. Because of a company like Nestle, for example, it's not their core business, but there's a value to them, so they might rather look at a partnership model or a license franchise type model in that way. Or a contract model even.
yes, makes sense, of course, and it depends. So is Nambu Group, this is more of a implementation side of things on your part. So currently, at what scale are you guys able to produce the products that you're making from insects for livestock feed, or maybe in future for human consumption? So is it are you currently on a smaller scale, or are you able to produce it on a like much larger commercial level scale?
So, the answer is twofold. From a BSF production perspective, I'd say we're at a larger commercial scale. From an industry demand perspective, I would say everybody in the BSF industry is still at a small scale in terms of the total product output.
Yeah.
But, so as I mentioned, we currently run 3 sites. Our smallest site can process around 2 tons of waste a day. With about sort of 250 kgs of larvae produced per ton. So we're looking at about 500 kgs of larvae produced per day out of our small sites. Our second site can process about 10 tons of waste a day, which is going to yield 2 to 2.5 tons of larvae protein per day. And then our third site we're in the process of moving it at the moment to a new facility where we can process up to 20 tons of waste a day. So that's going to yield sort of 4 to 5 tons of larval insect protein on a daily basis. From a commercial perspective, we look at about 10 tons of waste treatment each day as a baseline, but our fifth site that we're currently planning will be scoped to process up to about 50 tons of waste a day. So I think there's a variety of different levels. Our system is relatively modular, so we just replicate. When you move from say 10 tons to 20 tons, it's replication of the process in that way.
Okay. Then I think the only bottleneck you guys can face is from where this food scraps are being sourced, or where the feedstock is being sourced from. So have you faced that challenge yet, or is it something down the line that you want to take care of later?
So look, I think that just at the early stage, there's been a lot of work we've had to do in developing, again, understanding amongst waste suppliers in terms of what we do and the value of it, and through that, building those trust relationships. At the end of the day, thankfully for us in South Africa, legislation is on our side in pushing towards the banning of food and organic waste going to landfill, and also from the perspective of using certain types of food waste stream for feeding other livestock just because of biosecurity hazards. So those different aspects together mean that actually it's generally quite easy for us to source waste, food waste. That said, there is always the process of sort of understanding what that waste stream is, what the reliability or volumes are, any post-receipt processing, so any depackaging, those sorts of aspects. And that does take some time to really build that understanding and the relationship with the waste suppliers in that regard. But generally, it's not too much of an issue for us. currently. I think into the future, in a way, we expect there to be a little bit more competition, but at the same time, as legislation is more widely implemented and enforced, it's making life easier for us. So actually, we expect it should become probably quite easy, relatively more easy in the future. Again, I think the biggest thing though is just going to be, our biggest competition will come from other BSF producers most likely, and a lot of that's got to do with the relationship building with particular waste suppliers. Will be able to sustain that waste supply.
Lowell, I think, yeah, and now that you mentioned legislation already, this was something that I wanted to come right after this as well. Speaking of legislation and regulation side of things in Africa and even in countries like US and Europe, they're very much focused on helping companies reduce their carbon footprint. And we know that livestock industry has one of the biggest carbon footprint out there. So is there any kind of regulation or compliance or legislation that Nambu Group has faced or have solved in your own business operation, and how other companies, you guys can help them reduce their carbon footprint and be more aligned with these kind of regulations in US and Europe? Have you come across these kind of thoughts?
I mean, you look, there are a range of just operational legislation requirements that we've had to comply with, from waste management, transporting, on-site processing, product registrations for going into feed, for fertilizer, for export. There's a bunch of regulations in that regard. From a carbon perspective, or a carbon emissions perspective, there isn't that much legislation that necessarily constrains us at this stage. What there is that works in our favor is increasing legislation towards the imposition of carbon taxes and carbon credits or carbon trading. And because our process results in significantly less carbon emissions or carbon equivalent emissions than other waste treatment solutions like composting or landfilling of organic waste and food waste, means that we are a really good candidate for being able to assist, particularly like your large food and beverage companies, to be able to reduce their environmental footprint or their carbon emissions footprint through their waste value chain or waste handling and processing. And that obviously has quite a significant impact on their overall carbon intensivity or carbon footprint. So, I think in that way, we actually are really well aligned, and again, quite supported by legislation. That sort of is increasingly encouraging companies to look for less carbon intensive waste treatment solutions, for example, and based on what's available out there, black soldier fly probably seems to be one of the best, resulting in, as I think I mentioned, about 50% less carbon equivalent emissions than composting, than filling, and a bunch of other waste treatment solutions.
Makes sense. So even in US, France, and some other countries, Ireland, Netherlands, even in Thailand is one of the, another country where this insect-based protein is very famous, and especially for human consumption as well, not just for livestock feed and those. So this is something that I wanted to ask early on as well. So how is Nambu Group basically showcasing their differentiating factor, or basically what makes Nambu Group better than other available, alternative protein companies out there, which are also based on insect-based, using insect as well. Yeah.
Look, I think that it's important for us to have a geographic distinction. So, for example, a lot of the business development in Asia is really speaking to the Asian markets and Asian demand for livestock-based feed. Their production systems are slightly different, although, I think if we look at what a lot of our production system entails, it's relatively similar to sort of the Asian model, definitely more so than a lot of what we'd see in, again, the European or North American context. I think at the end of the day, if we look at Nambu, our production system has been developed, refined, and planned, developed, and refined for the African context. So, we've really worked hard to develop a model that has got a low capital intensity, a low skill intensity, because, skill is a high-end skill is relatively expensive in South Africa and Africa in general. So I'm talking about things like engineers, for example. That's a relatively limited or scarce skill that's really expensive to sort of require as part of your operations, day-to-day operations management. Instead, we've got a lot of semi-skilled and unskilled labor that need employment. And so we've sort of really focused on a production model that can leverage that and can be more labor intensive in that way. And then also from a very sort of a technical perspective, we really looked at technologies or techniques that are appropriate for our context. So, where we can get spare parts locally, where we can have then machines serviced locally and operated by local operators, things that don't require really high-end automation, mechanization that, if you've got a breakdown, you need to bring in an engineer from South Africa to Malawi, for example, if we were running a site there, or you need to import components from India or China or wherever. Those are all really costly factors that influence your ability to maintain your production consistently. So that's really how we've looked to differentiate ourselves. And with that also is to really focus on this distributed model of business development. So as opposed to having one or two very large waste treatment sites, we rather have, which those very large waste treatment sites generally need to bring in a lot of waste from a long distance. So you're carting waste, which is, again, from a sustainability perspective and an economic efficiency perspective, is not a great idea. We've really focused on rather being able to break the facilities down to as small a level, or as robust a level, so that we can deploy them as close to waste sources as possible and run a number of sites in that way. And then also just, looking at our context with limited waste management infrastructure, limited things like electricity infrastructure, a lot of support in that way from an infrastructure perspective that we lack, that we've sort of worked around and developed or solved.
Yes, I really like how, I think this is a pattern in a lot of African-based startups, that enabling the community and helping the whole community grow is mostly the primary goal of basically lots of emerging companies out there. That is not the case with a lot of Western-based companies, where scalability is much more in focus rather than helping like the whole industry to grow, but like they are more competitive, which makes sense. And I really appreciate this about you sharing this with me, that your focus is also on helping the local community grow and giving
That's,
more people jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think at the same time, we also need to consider that the scalability and the way that you scale looks differently in different contexts. So, if you consider scale just in terms of making bigger and bigger facilities, that's not going to work in our context. Our infrastructure, the waste supply networks, all of that just won't work. And we've seen quite a few companies that have had that approach in South Africa and Africa in general. Okay, well, we're going to build these really large, massive scale facilities, and they fail because the context doesn't actually suit that sort of approach. We're not there yet. The economies aren't developed to that level from an infrastructure perspective, from a centralization perspective, to be able to do that. Which is why, again, we've taken this more distributed model. And just speaking to that context. So in many ways, our approach allows us to scale much more than sort of traditional, what you would imagine as a large scale facility, because we can get to a much wider geographic area. In that way, we can actually scale much further than if we were very centralized. It's a little bit counterintuitive in a way, but I think that's just really that contextual understanding of, what's appropriate for your context and how best can you work in that.
I totally agree, Lowell. This makes so much sense than how other startups follow the growth philosophy. So now that, again, this is a very, like, from the point we started, this is a highly very new niche industry, and there have been lots of challenges that you yourself have solved. So from breeding to packaging and everything in between, and now you're trying to solve even the logistical issues as well. So during your journey as a CEO of such an emerging startup and in such a niche industry, a growing industry, did you ever think that, okay, maybe this is not going to work, or you felt a little bit like demotivated? So was there any low point that you'd like to share with me?
Yeah, absolutely. Many low points, man. What can I say? I think starting up any business is never easy, and starting something in a new industry is maybe even more difficult. So I've definitely had many low points along the way. We've thought, no, man, I don't know. I don't know if this is the right thing. Maybe I should just go and get get a job in an office, shave my beard and wear a tie, and work for somebody, and that might be a lot easier. But at the end of the day, the benefits of what we do, the flexibility, the impact that what we do has, the feedback that we get from our customers, from our clients, from partners, in terms of the impact that our work has on all of them is what keeps me, keeps you getting up at the beginning of every day, keeps you getting up after every knockdown, keeps you motivated, keeps you focused. Yeah, it's not never just upward trajectory, never just positive. There's always the negative stuff, but at the end of the day, you also, I think that's part of the position or the role that I play and any CEO is to be able to weather that, to keep getting knocked down and keep getting up again and learn, improve, take another step forward. Same thing the next day, same thing the next day. Yeah, that's sort of it's just part of the job, I guess. So.
That's amazing. That's an amazing attitude towards work, Lowell, and I've seen this common in a lot of successful CEOs, that this not giving up attitude, and basically realizing that you're not doing it just for yourself, but there are a lot of people dependent on you.
Yeah.
This is the growth formula that every CEO follows. Yeah. Should follow at least.
Oh,
So okay, also basically I'm towards the end of my last question. I actually intended to only this was intended basically a short conversation of 30 minutes, but I had so much fun talking to you about all this. So my last question is mostly related to IP and basically intellectual property, or trying to protect your innovations. You mentioned that the earlier challenges you faced when working in Nambu was there was lack of knowledge distribution out there, and people were not very open to discuss. So, and then now that you've solved a lot of problem yourself, so what are your views about protecting your innovations, or is there any patents or any kind of protection you guys have employed in your operation?
no patents that we've pursued, just because at the end of the day, patents only valid for as long as it's valid for. As soon as it expires, then that becomes open knowledge. And at the end of the day, given what we do, it's been more beneficial for us to really focus on just keeping certain aspects of what we do proprietary. So, there's like the secret sauce, the secret ingredient that got the Coca-Cola, as an example. It's like whether you regard it as a trade secret, proprietary knowledge, there are just certain aspects that we just keep confidential internally around, whether it's the way that we feed our larvae, or some of the specific types of processes or equipments we use in the process, or the post-harvest and further processing. And that's really the main way we focus on protecting ourselves, because that gives us a long-term defensible position, as opposed to, a patent that after 20 years it becomes common knowledge, or if it's not granted at a global level, well, somebody can replicate it in a different region, where information is available out there. So we have taken that sort of a stance. At the same time, though, also, I think, again, we keep coming back to the fact that farmers, so, at the end of the day, if you consider something like a dairy farm, well, what they do on one dairy farm to another dairy farm is a little bit different, but it's generally the same sort of thing. So, I think we also just need to be appreciative of that, or recognize that, and then accept from there that, you create your defensible position through how well you know how to do what you do, and the lead that you can gain on any other potential competitors, and what differentiates you in that regard. So a lot of that's got to do with relationship building. A lot of that's got to do with the specific production approach that we use compared to some of our competitors, and at the same time also just building a brand, a strong market share, strong visibility, strong networks with investors and partners. That's all part of what we would regard as our secret sauce that we look to protect. Yeah.
Yeah, trade secrets are always better than publicly disclosing your innovations. So
I mean, I suppose, yeah, some people would look at it differently, but that's the approach we've taken. So far, it's working well for us, and it fits into our philosophy. So.
Yeah. It highly depends on you in the industry you are and the technology you're dealing with, but makes sense. And with that, Lowell, that was my last question. And I must say that this has been an amazing chat with you, getting to know this highly niche industry. I've always been interested from the day I heard about that. Okay, insects could become a part of human diet as well. And so, okay, so now that again I'm saying it's last question, but I have another question. So where is at what point people can expect to start, in your opinion, people can start to expect to see humans actively consuming insect-based proteins?
Insects.
Yeah.
Look, I think, and this in a way speaks to your question earlier about, for example, like companies in Thailand. If we look at, it's estimated that about a third of the world already eats insects as part of their daily diet. So a lot of that happens in parts of Africa and parts of Asia, where it's just culturally normal. It's normalized to eat insects. There's no weird yuck factor or anything like that. It's sort of more in sort of like your westernized type societies where we've got this aversion towards insects, and you sort of think of it creepy cruelly and, oh, I don't want to touch it, or I don't want it to touch me, sort of thing. So, I think that people are already eating insects, and there are always sub-communities, even in sort of more westernized societies, that are interested in it and are doing so. Realistically, though, what I assess the future will look like is not necessarily you're going to go out and you can either buy a beef patty, a chicken patty, or a BSF insect protein patty necessarily. I suspect more what you'll end up finding is that insect protein will start getting included in things like your McDonald's burger patty, or your, like a nugget, or into whatever product, might include, whether it's protein bars or protein shakes, or a whole different range of areas where protein is included. And what will probably happen, basically just from an economic perspective, based on price and availability, you will start having more and more inclusion of insect-based protein in those sorts of products. So it won't necessarily be that, you go out to the shops and buy a bag of dried BSF and this is dinner. It's probably going to be more, you go out and buy sausages that have got 50% insect protein in. That's sort of more the direction, I think.
Maybe supplements and protein powders is the kind of market that will get this first. Right?
So definitely, and from like a supplement perspective, energy bar perspective, there's a lot of sort of traction that's already been gained there. But I think if we look at this will become an industry that is going to become ubiquitous worldwide. So just like farming chickens is, farming cattle is, it is becoming one of those sorts of industries, and its application will vary. It'll expand greatly as the volumes increase. So going from your quite niche protein supplements or whatever to, again, I see a future where just an easy example, your McDonald's burger patty has got some insect protein in it, because that's just sort of the direction we're going to be moving in. And at that stage, I think people won't find it so gross anymore. It'll just slowly sort of creep in, excuse the pun, but it'll creep into sort of popular diets in a way, and acceptance in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's more of like how things look. So people might not be comfortable like eating the bug directly, but it's more about, if
Absolutely.
it is included the protein. I cannot see it, then I can eat it. Right?
Exactly. You don't want to necessarily eat raw crickets or dried crickets or fried crickets if they look like crickets. But if it's a powder and you put it into something, well, I don't know that I really care about it anymore. Then I'm quite happy to eat it. So yeah.